Let's talk music.
Ha! Now you're talking. Cheetahs, girl power.
Throw your hands up if you know that you're a star. You better stand up if you know just who you are. Never give up, never say die. Girl power.
Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to the DCOM review. After almost 3 weeks of delays, sorry about that by the way, we're finally taking a closer look at the first movie in the Cheetah trilogy. Crazy to think about, but it's been almost 13 years since the original Cheetah Girls first hit television. It always seems to be remembered fondly when people who grew up with it recount watching it, but does it hold up as a film? Well, let's find out. Spoiler warning now, in case you haven't seen the movie yet, and a quick shout out to Hunter James who suggested I dive into this movie. With all that said, let's dive into the Cheetah Girls. This movie starts off at an interesting point in time. The quartet that makes up the girl group are already well acquainted and have been performing together for a while. It bears mentioning that these movies are based on a series of books, also called the Cheetah Girls, with the same basic setup. So all four are friends, but it's made clear later that Chanel and Galleria have been together a lot longer than Dorinda and Aquanet, who join in later, which sets up an emotional reveal for a little later on. The Cheetah Girls themselves are Galleria, portrayed by That's So Raven star and Disney Channel icon Raven Simone, Chanel, portrayed by Adrienne Bailon, Aquanet, portrayed by Keely Williams, and Dorinda, portrayed by Sabrina Bryan. So, the early part of this movie revolves around the Cheetahs' push to achieve stardom and fame through their music. To that end, they perform one of their songs, Cinderella, at a talent show audition for their school. They pretty much ace the audition, which, of course, leads to them getting recognized by a famous music producer by the name of Jackal Johnson. That absurd name is an intentional and over-the-top way of calling this particular producer an opportunistic scavenger, meaning that it's not much of a surprise when he later turns out to be not all he's cracked up to be, a trait that, to her credit, Galleria's mother sees instantly as she confronts Jackal about his interest in the Cheetah Girls. But eventually, after some convincing from Galleria's father, the girls are allowed to talk to Jackal Johnson. The meeting seemingly goes well, despite Galleria's running with some dog droppings, and it would seem that the Cheetah Girls have arrived. Galleria herself wastes little time making sure the whole school knows about it, as surprise surprise, she lets the thought of fame and riches get to her head. Her attitude is also starting to annoy the other Cheetah Girls, who start feeling like background noise with Galleria seemingly calling all the shots. While tension brews amongst the ranks, Dorinda, the resident dancer of the group, has been offered a huge summer opportunity to dance professionally. This leads to a very powerful scene where Chanel is looking for Dorinda, only to realize the truth about her situation. She lives in foster care, because her mother didn't want her. That is a pretty powerful plot point, and provides a fair bit of context to Dorinda's character, who was always working or busy for reasons previously unbeknownst to the other Cheetah Girls. In the aftermath of all that, we return to the studio of Jackal Johnson, where he reveals that, oh no, the path to fame and stardom wasn't what the girls were expecting? Who could have ever seen that coming? Standard plot device aside, this leads to a falling out amongst Galleria and the others, as Galleria is hell-bent on achieving fame her own way, while the others feel like they should consider the offer a bit more. This leads to a couple of scenes where Galleria and Chanel are discussing things with their parents, but in different ways. The most important of these scenes, and the one I feel like is easily the second best moment in the movie, is Chanel talking to her mother about appreciating her more, since she's seen what Dorinda has to live with, and knows now, more than ever, that she's lucky to have her mom in her life. At this point, basic story structure will tell you that things are going sour right now, and to resolve the movie, a major event, or climax, needs to happen to re-establish harmony. Unfortunately, they gave us this instead. So Galleria is just walking her dog Toto, and out of nowhere, he just runs away. Somehow his leash even comes off, even though he still had it on before he jumped into a hole on the road, and this is supposed to be the inciting incident that causes the Cheetah Girls to realize that their problems aren't overly large, and aren't ones that can't be solved, and they are better off together. Here's why this entire setup just doesn't work though. Number 1. Toto was never a major element in connecting the Cheetah Girls together. Only Galleria had a particularly close bond with him. If, for example, Toto had run off one day and while Galleria was chasing him, he ran into Dorinda or Aquanet and that's how the girls met, there would have been something there. 2. The girls kind of worked together to save him, but not in a particularly challenging way, so the situation doesn't really advance any character outside of Aqua who takes the subway for the first time, and that's not a very significant or tonally relevant aspect of the film, given what we learn of the other characters over time. And 3. They somehow win the talent show, despite the fact that they didn't officially perform in it. It's just too easy of a resolution that doesn't feel deserved or sensible, as opposed to the resolution from Camp Rock 2, for example, which is both earned and sensible at the same time. They were never going to beat Camp Star in voting, but what happens in the aftermath of all that actually made a whole lot of sense. And that's pretty much the movie. not too heavy on significant plot points. And now, the characters. I honestly think that Galleria's mother Dorothea steals the show in this one. And yes, both her and Toto are intentionally named to reference the Wizard of Oz, which also happens to be the name of the director, Oz Scott, so you can see where it all came from. She's so dynamic and her presence so meaningful with every scene she's in. She just might be my second favorite character in this movie. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about the other minor characters. What you see is pretty much what you get, especially with Jackal Johnson, as I mentioned, so we'll get right into the four leading ladies. Aquanet is the cheetah girl who suffers the most from a lack of character focus. It's like the screenwriters forgot she was there for most of the movie. Important character aspects such as her upbringing, her inspiration to sing and perform, all left out, in favor of her entire character revolving around being from Texas, and that's about it. It's unfair because when she does speak, she seems like an interesting enough character, which only makes it a larger mistake to underwrite her to such a large degree. We do get more from her in the two sequels, but just focusing on Aquanet in the context of this movie, she's an underutilized character compared to the others. Chanel is a solid and believable character in this movie. She really embraces that heavy urban Latina vibe that defines her character, and it feels like she really is Chanel, versus some girl portraying her, and that goes a long way. Her character arc is a bit messy at times, but the way it resolves is pretty well executed in the aftermath of her interactions with Dorinda. She always struck me as a better leader than Raven's character, because she always seemed more level-headed and less driven by ego, which is ironic since she's literally named after a French makeup company. I referred to Galleria as extremely loud and incredibly bossy in my top 5 most underrated DCOMs video, and this movie serves as a pretty good example as to why I think that way. Don't get me wrong, Raven does a pretty good job portraying the character of Galleria, but the annoying way she goes full diva right in the middle of the movie, before she's even signed a single contract, is off-putting at best. Not to mention the fact that even before they had their chance at fame, she was still pretty full of herself. And I get it, the Cheetah Girls need direction, and Cheetah Girls 2 proves that better than this movie does, but the way she goes about doing it should, at times, be toned down a little bit. Her character also feels a little bit incomplete when we get to the scene she shares with her love interest in this movie about singing a different kind of music. But we're never given anything more than that about why she keeps that side of her musicality hidden. Oh no, a good character, but as has become the standard here, I always save the best for last. Dorinda is my favorite character from this movie for several reasons. The way they set up her eventual reveal to Chanel is probably the best scene in the movie. It's heavy, but it's not acted in such a heavy way that you stop believing it. It would have been so easy for Dorinda to go overboard with it, but I think Sabrina Bryan strikes a good balance here, and that's pretty much the case throughout the movie. Her situation has made her somewhat shy, but not so shy that she's afraid to be defensive, and that's also portrayed pretty well. And yes, I'll admit that since I used to be an avid dancer, maybe I'm a little bit biased towards her particular contributions to the group, but her actual dancing is few and far between, so she had to bring it as a character too, and I think she did just that. There's no such thing as a flawless character, but I think the things Sabrina Bryan does right with hers, for me, far outweighs the negatives. And that's the Cheetah Girls. So, what's the verdict? This movie is solid in several areas, really good in a few areas, but falls flat pretty much everywhere else. A lot of this stems from their choice to introduce the girls as a band already in progress. It allows the movie to dive into the plot more easily because it doesn't have to establish an origin story, but that also works against the movie because it's harder to connect to a unit of characters who have already made most of their important connections off screen before the movie itself even starts. We don't know how they all met, why they want to be successful, or even what inspired their name outside of cheetahs being fast and furious. Lemonade Mouth proved that you can effectively handle several different character arcs, even if some are decidedly less important than others, while still telling a compelling story. But this movie drops the ball on that a bit, mainly with Aquanet, who as I mentioned is extremely underwritten. But the urban details of this movie are one of the positives, the way the characters talk and interact, and the fact that they are at a magnet school, which historically is meant to create more educational opportunities for our very diverse cast. Both are good details to include, since one of the only other DCOMs to understand the essence of urban culture and convey it well was Jump In. And if you're going to have a diverse cast living in the city, the movie maker should understand what that feels like, and I think they did here. I haven't mentioned the music yet, but I think most of us would agree that the songs are one of the better parts of the movie. Individually, they're all pretty good, or at least catchy, and the songs do a better job than the screenwriting itself of conveying who these girls are and what they stand for, especially their song Cinderella, which I think pretty much captures the Cheetah Girls as far as the strong independent women they aspire to be. But the movie itself never reached that level in terms of what they conveyed through normal dialogue, which works against the movie to a small degree. And, oh yeah, Whitney Houston, one of the greatest singers of all time, was a producer on this movie, so it's no accident that the songs are this good. All in all, The Cheetah Girls is a good, but by no means great film. It's a pretty basic setup with not too many overly important or unique plot points to go along with 2 or 3 particularly powerful moments, but that's about it. Everything else is pretty predictable as far as music movies go, but I don't think that's too large of a critique since this was the first DCOM to utilize music to this large of a degree. I think they could have added a bit more to the runtime to help establish the Cheetah Girls as a group a bit better, and I think the result would have been a much better film. Even though the characters are, for the most part, very solid, and the songs themselves very memorable. And again, the climax was a pretty below average one as far as these things go, and they could have done a lot more to make it feel like it mattered. And yes, I get it, saving a little dog inherently matters, but it doesn't create a sensible enough reason to reunite the cheetahs compared to how other, better movies might resolve themselves, so it's definitely a bit of an oversight. But there's a reason that this movie is as memorable as it is, and why Oz Scott was nominated for a Directors Guild Award for it. The movie does a lot right with its setting and the way it captures it, with the heavier moments, even though there aren't too many of those, and with its characters for the most part. I would say that the good kind of balances out the bad in this movie as a whole. It's certainly not as great as some would have you believe, nor as bad as IMDb would like you to think, but somewhere in the middle. Good, but not great. But I will always stand by these words: you can't know for sure until you watch it yourself. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, help me out with the likes, subs, and share it all over social media. And don't forget to follow the Disney Brain on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Links down below. Don't worry guys, after several requests, yes, I will review Backstage. I've watched the first 5 episodes, so I pretty much know what I'm going to say about it, so that video will be coming soon, along with the top 5 worst Nick shows, before we finally take a trip back to the Mystery Shack and discuss the top 10 best episodes of Gravity Falls. So, lots to look forward to. Until then...